And now on Coast to Coast, we're going to talk about secret societies, the Illuminati. Who are they? Robert Howells joins us next on Coast to Coast AM. I'm looking forward to this next couple hours. Robert Howells has spent the last 20 years investigating the mysteries of Rennes-le-Château, the Priory of Sion, and the history of conspiracy theories. Now, during this time, he has built up an extensive knowledge and experience of secret societies, symbolism, esoteric thought as well. Several of his books, The Last Pope, Inside the Priory of Sion, and the Illuminati. His website is linked up at coasttocoastam.com. Robert, what a time to be involved with the Illuminati and investigating all of this. Welcome to the show.
Hello, George. Thank you for having me on.
My pleasure. Looking forward to this. This is an interesting subject matter that not a lot of people investigate. How did you get started into it?
I have a kind of very alternative view on life and history, and it came from childhood. It came from an interest in mythology, but also in personal experience. I used to have out-of-body experiences as a child.
Ah, okay.
And that gives you a very different perspective, because if you leave your body, I didn't know what they were at the time, I was just a kid, but if I ever got flu, I'd be able to see myself from across the room. It was like my consciousness would come out. And then when you do that, you don't have any needs, you don't have any physicality. So when you then hear about ideas about hell and religion, none of that makes any sense, because you think, well, when you die, your body's gone. You know, there's no reward in the afterlife. There's no torture in the afterlife. You've got this life now. So I kind of started to question religion. And I remember being in school and teachers talking about Noah's Ark and thinking, you know, Noah's Ark, the dimensions are given, it's about 70 foot long. You can't fit 2.5 billion species in a box that's 70 foot long. So I really began to look at religion differently and wonder whether there was anything behind it, and whether there was, you know, what was the truth behind it all. And that kind of led me to secret societies, because I started to read a lot and discover that secret societies may have had real secrets that had to be protected through history. So I ended up in a bookshop called Watkins Books, which is a large mind, body, spirit occult bookshop in London. It's one of the oldest in the world. It's well over 100 years old now. And it was there that I read all the religions, Bhagavad Gita, the Zend-Avesta, the Quran, Zoroastrianism, Christianity, Gnosticism, Zen. But I also encountered a lot of people from different secret societies. So I got to know people in Freemasonry and Templars, Sufis, the Gnostics, and also a member of the Priory of Sion, these secret societies mentioned in Dan Brown's Da Vinci Code. This was back in the early 1990s. So
what was the motivation, Robert? What was the motivation of these secret societies? What was their mission?
To protect secrets throughout history. So as Christianity became a state religion in Europe and became more controlling, it became the religion of the Roman Empire, and it became more controlling and more oppressive, any alternative views began to get suppressed. So you see the persecution of the Cathars, where the Cathars were Christians, but they had a different view of Christianity. And that didn't involve money and power, basically. It was much more humble and much more Christ-like in its history. So it seemed to me that in the symbolism and the rituals of secret societies, they were passing down knowledge that was perhaps, certainly older than the knowledge in Christianity. So, for example, I discovered that there were lots of prior gods on earth that fulfilled the role of Jesus before Jesus came along. So in terms of virgin birth, you had Horus, the Egyptian gods, Attis, Zoroaster, Dionysus, Krishna. These were all born of a virgin. Mithras was born of a virgin on the 25th of December.
Would you put Zeus in there too, the Greek god? Yeah.
Yeah. So you've got all these prior characters. And then there's the story of Persephone, who comes down into matter, and it's the idea of the soul that incarnates on the 22nd for 3 days of December. So on the 25th of December, she incarnates into matter, and then she rises back up at Easter, which from that area, there is the idea that you were born into Virgo after 9 months. The constellation of Virgo. So I'd find in these myths, and it's certainly in the crucifixions and things like that, that all these major characters that were crucified. Dionysus was crucified, hung from a tree and pierced in the side with a spear. And there's a really interesting story, the idea of Lazarus. So Jesus raises Lazarus from the dead in the town of Bethany. Now, if you go back a few thousand years, you get Horus, the son of God, Ra, raising Osiris from the dead in the town of Bethanu. So it's the same story.
Interesting story, huh?
Yeah, so I began to discover that all the key elements in Christianity, in the life of Jesus, all the mystical elements, are actually from previous myths. They're from older stories. And it's not just one here and there where there's a similarity. It's quite clearly there's a source for all of these. And I can see in secret societies like Freemasonry in the third degree, you go through this death and resurrection ritual. And all of these go back to this idea of death and resurrection. It's kind of the nature ritual that all, plants and everything die in winter and they're resurrected in the spring. So the whole myth goes back to that very pagan idea. Now, the Freemasons are practicing that as a ritual. They don't see it as the crucifixion, the death and resurrection.
Were these societies, Robert, were they powerful in those days?
No, they would have been born out of necessity, really. They would have come from groups that had knowledge.
Okay.
Knowledge from, things like the Egyptian libraries and the Gnostics. And they would have seen that knowledge being destroyed. And they would have seen their temples and the churches being destroyed. And, most of the Christian churches in Europe are built upon pagan temples. They demolished the old temple of Isis and they would build a Christian one. So, and for a time, there was a time when they were tolerated. In the first few hundred years of the Catholic Church, they would install a pagan altar in churches like Notre Dame. That had its own pagan altar. So it had a Christian altar and a pagan altar. But as time went on, that began to get, more of it got absorbed into Christianity, and the iconography and the symbols all get taken over by Christianity. And the old religions and old ideas begin to get pushed out. And I think a lot of what was thought to be the truth by those secret societies and groups, they felt they needed to protect that and pass that on.
Were they dangerous at all, Robert, the societies?
Not then, no. No, they didn't need to be. I think it was a matter of survival and a matter of protecting what they saw to be a religious truth. So at the time, the danger would have come from the Catholic Church, which began the Inquisition, began to burn people for having alternative views. So no, I don't think the danger really lies with the secret societies at that stage. It becomes more prevalent later, I think.
The Knights Templar, now I'll always know of them as the guardians of the Shroud of Turin. What was their role during that time period?
Well, yeah, the Templars are really interesting because they go to the Holy Land and they spend about 7 or 8 years excavating Temple Mount, where the original Temple of Jerusalem was, Solomon's Temple. And they did basically an archaeological dig, and whatever they recovered is important. It's reenacted. The entire excavation is reenacted in Masonic degrees, as if they discovered secrets. So I think that's symbolic that they went to the Holy Land and they actually spoke to Saladin and they spoke to the Arabs, and they would have learnt of this alternative material, because while it's been suppressed over 1,000 years in Europe, this hadn't happened in the East. So you would have still had the equivalent of the Dead Sea Scrolls or the Nag Hammadi Library, and there were certainly Gnostic Gospels that were known about, the Book of Jubilees, possibly a Gospel of Thomas. So there's a good chance that they found other Gospels, other information that had been excluded from the Bible that gave them a different perspective. So they became heretics. But they were also very rich, and the French king decided that he wanted their wealth. So when they returned from the Holy Land, because the French king kept squandering all the money, he eventually decided to round them up and seize all their goods. So there was an inquisition against the Templars eventually. But they part their knowledge, their entire fleet disappeared, their wealth disappeared. Most of the Templars escaped outside of France, many of them.
Are there any Templars today?
Yes, oh yes. Yeah, they meet in London, actually. There's a group that meets in London. There's a kind of worldwide group that's run out of Portugal currently.
Huh.
There's plenty of Templars in America.
Really? I didn't know that.
Oh, yeah. Who believes that they're a continuation of the original Knights Templars. And they have libraries and they have archives and material. Yeah, they're still going in various forms. There's certainly a Templar group in Scotland.
What's their mission today?
That is hard to tell. That I'm not sure of entirely, because I think a lot of this got diluted. Certainly in the last few hundred years. They moved away from being esoteric and kind of ritualistic, and have become slightly business-like. But I think they still have some of the ideals. The problem I have with the Templars and the Freemasons is they were never proactive. They were very good at teaching their people. If somebody joined the Freemasons, they would take them through these rituals and teach them stuff, but they never put anything out. They stopped trying to influence society. So as a group, they're not very influential. I think they're degrees and people can work through them, and they can learn about themselves and use it as a kind of self-development tool for those that want to get in it for that. But I think a lot of the understanding of the symbolisms may have been lost or only belongs to the highest degrees. So it's hard to tell, because you rarely meet a very senior member of the Templars or the Freemasons, and when you do, they don't really give a lot away. And I'm not a joiner. I'm not interested in joining groups. I'm interested in what they do and what they are, but I've never been one for joining secret societies.
Robert Howells, our special guest. His website's linked up at coasttocoastam.com. We use a phrase these days, Robert, quite often called the Illuminati. Who are they? What are they?
Okay, historically there were kind of three versions. So the original Illuminati, I think people will be quite surprised, in 1776 the Illuminati formed in Bavaria amongst academics and Freemasons and members of secret societies. And their aim was actually to free society from corrupt politicians, from kings that were unfit to rule, from religious influence on science and education. They were against all forms of corruption. They were really interested, and they were proactive. Unlike what Freemasonry had done, they were very active in society. They helped fuel the French Revolution because they saw that kings did not serve the public. And they would look at people in terms of, do you serve? Does a ruler serve? This is a question your country's having to face right now, of choosing a leader that will actually serve the country and not their own ends and the ends of their friends. They were really interesting. They were very anti-establishment to some extent. And they would recruit people and they would put them through initiations, and these people would then be told to infiltrate the highest groups of government and business and religion, and to start to steer it towards something that was much more kind of advanced. And they had a complete equality, they had complete tolerance, they had male and female members, they believed that women were just as good as men, they saw no difference. And this is a long time ago, this is the 18th century. So they were very forward-thinking, and they really wanted society to be ruled by meritocracy. It's like if you went for a job today at a hospital, you'd have trouble getting a job. Now in this country, we've got a politician who's in charge of all our hospitals who wouldn't get a job as a cleaner if he went for a job in a hospital. He's got no history, no background, no education. I think most of our politicians have a degree in ancient history or something equally useless, and politics, and that's it. So we end up with leaders and cabinets and senates that are not qualified to have the roles that they have. Any other area of life, if you went for a job and you had no qualifications, you wouldn't get in the door.
No, not at all.
None of them are qualified. So the Illuminati saw this, and they said these people aren't fit to rule. I mean, Europe was under kings and nobles at the time. It was much more run by succession, by people who inherited their power and had absolutely no qualities often to use it, and like the French king would just squander all the money.
See, but today we would call the Illuminati those people who are extremely wealthy, the power brokers of this planet. Is that accurate?
Well, sadly, it's a kind of what happened was a book came out in the 1970s by Anton LaVey and Robert Shear called The Illuminatus. And they claimed that the Illuminati were it was a fiction, book of fiction, and they claimed the Illuminati were the secret rulers of the world, and they find all sorts of evidence for this controlling a hidden hand that's running everything. And that kind of got linked, it got conflated with the idea of a new world order. Whereas in reality, the Illuminati were the complete opposite of the new world order. So, although, the modern accepted use of the term is that the Illuminati and the New World Order are the same thing. In fact, the Illuminati would have been completely opposed. They would have been the enemy of the New World Order. But yes, we do have this idea of a New World Order.
And people aren't comfortable with that, Robert. So something's happening where people don't like them, don't want them around. What do you think it is?
Well, there's a sense that the people in power aren't working in the interests of the public. I mean, I can give you... do you want an example?
All right, then, even though you're absolutely right, but give us an example.
So, for example, in the UK, our government spent £27 billion of taxpayers' money funding the war in Afghanistan. Now, we were there for 15 years. It cost us 453 soldiers. At no point did the news really get into why we were there. The politicians gave this excuse that we're there to stabilise the region, but in wars historically have a tendency to destabilise regions, and this one's just causing more problems.
We chased Bin Laden out of there, and it took years to finally catch him and get him.
Well, it would have helped if we'd have started in the country where it was and not gone and invaded Iraq for the hell of it, for the oil. So I kind of looked into Afghanistan, and I could not understand what we were doing in there, and I couldn't understand why the news. It seemed to me that all this 24-hour news we got, and nobody was really digging into that question of what are we doing in there. So during this time, we spent $27 billion. Our government cut $12 billion from our health service. So they were cutting money from our health service, which keeps people healthy, and spending it on military to go and invade and supposedly stabilise a foreign country that has nothing to do with the UK. It's no threat to our country at all.
Same with us.
And I looked into it, and I discovered that there's a vast natural gas reserve under the Caspian Sea. It's one of the biggest oil reserves in Europe, certainly. And the oil companies want to run a pipeline to the Persian Gulf, and to do that, they have to go through either Iran or Afghanistan. And so the conspiracy theorists online are looking at that and saying, the reason we're in this war is for gas. It's nothing to do with stabilising regions. The same we were in Iraq. There was no weapons of mass destruction. So at which point you have to think, well, who does our army work for? Because it's not protecting our realm. If anything, it's going to create more terrorism. So who is our government working for? Who are our armies working for? And they seem to be working for private industry. They seem to be working for oil companies.
Yes, you're right.
They don't seem to be working in support of the public. And we vote these people into power to be in service of the public. And this is what the Illuminati discovered 300 years ago, that the rulers aren't in service of the public. And then you have to decide what you're going to do about that, which is a problem. So,
and the conspiracy theorists, they're right.
Yeah, I mean, that's the real surprise. You start to read this thing and think, oh, this is crazy. A lot of conspiracy theory stuff is completely out there, but some of it starts to look very close to like it might be true. And then you get things like, Dick Cheney, your defence secretary, gave $8.5 million to Halliburton for rebuilding Iraq and working in Iraq, a big oil conglomerate.
$8.5 billion.
Politics, he gets the job of CEO at Halliburton.
Hold on for a second, Robert. We're at our commercial break, but we'll come right back with more. Okay, welcome back to Coast. Our special guest, Robert Howells, as we talk about secret societies. And, Robert, we were talking about the Illuminati and these societies and, of course, where we are today with them. The Illuminati, they are power brokers, are they not? Don't they control many things that governments do?
The New World Order, that people confuse what was a different secret society. But yeah, the New World Order appears to be made up, if you believe in the idea of a New World Order, of old money and businesses and these various groups that were put together after World War II, the kind of the idea that the elite are somehow organised and are steering society towards their aims, and through globalisation of resources and things like that. And we see these groups, the Council of Foreign Relations, the Bilderbergs, the Trilateral Commission, the Club of Rome. These are real organisations, and Private Members Club, Bohemian Grove. And these have some of the wealthiest people in the world, including presidents and leading politicians, meeting in secret to discuss the future of the world. And to outsiders, it looks like Spectre from the James Bond films.
Yeah, exactly.
They look really suspicious, really. So people assume that they are up to no good. And then, in the way that the world is going with these endless wars and the amount of money that's being poured into the military and those kind of industries, it does look like they have some control.
What do they want?
If you follow the logic or the pattern of the way the world's going, you're looking towards kind of creating society that's almost in slavery, a kind of globalization of the world's resources, the enslavement and exploitation of people for the benefit of the elite. So that kind of mass cheap manufacturing where people are, there's something like 27 million slaves in the world today, which is more than at any other time in history. Jeez. And there are entire countries like Indonesia where they're all farmers originally, and they've all been kind of migrated into these factories to produce cheap goods, cheap products, and consumerism. It's all consumerism. So I think there's that idea that there is this globalization of resources going on, that the World Bank is monopolizing the money, that the oil industry is monopolizing the fuel, and that the power is growing for these people. And you do have that 1% that people rally against, which is there is clearly such a big gap between the wealthiest people in the world and the rest. And I think, whether or not you believe in a New World Order, I think these people come together when it suits them for their own ends. I'm not so sure there's some overarching conspiracy theory where they are running the world. I don't think they're that organised, but I do think that people with power can meet in secret currently and decide things that have a lasting impact on the public. And to some extent, the politicians we have don't really have the power to address that, it seems. I was talking about the Afghanistan war, we had both governments, the left-wing and right-wing government in this country in power, both funded the Afghanistan war. Neither of them stood up to it or stopped it. And neither of them could justify why we were spending all the money that needed to go into healthcare and social care and into the people. The reaction towards things like terrorism, 53 people died in Paris, in France, in a terrorist act. And our Prime Minister jumped up on TV and said no amount of money will be saved. We will spend any amount of money to fight terrorists. That wasn't even in our country. Now 20,000 people in the UK die every year because they can't afford central heating. They die of hypothermia. And our government does nothing about that. And there's 20,000 of our own people. So they seem to be steering taxpayers' money into the military and into war instead of spending it on building up their own country.
They don't care about people, do they?
Well, no, but people shouldn't be afraid of their governments. Governments should be afraid of their people. And that's what people need to realise. That's where the groups like the original Illuminati came in, because they empowered people. And you see that today in online communities. I got tired of watching war on the news, where you would see the war in Iraq and it looked like a firework display. It was all filmed from a distance. The camera was miles away from what was going on. You never saw the real impact, the schools, the hospitals, the children that were killed. You only ever saw, look at all the big flashing lights. Now, that was mainstream news, but if you go online, if you listen to radio shows like yours, if you start to look around at alternative news stories, you start to discover that actually some of this stuff is really having a bad impact and is doing a lot of damage. And that's going to create a lot of hatred for the West and a lot of anti-West sentiment, because we're killing people's children, and they don't know why we're there. And, well, they know why we're there. They think we're there for the oil, and we probably are. And that's pretty shocking.
Yeah, it is. And the fact that this sad collateral damage is there as we try to pillage is having this effect, I think, this hatred toward our countries.
We go in and we bomb the infrastructure, which is the water supply and things like that. How does that win you a war, depriving the citizens of clean water? They start to die of disease. You know,
and they end up hating your guts.
Yeah, absolutely, and rightly so. And you kind of say, we didn't vote these politicians in to do this, did we? We didn't ask them to keep going to war on our behalf. There's no battles that we need to be fighting anymore. There's no threat. There's no direct threat from any country to the US or to the UK. We haven't been invaded for 1,000 years over here. We've really kind of.
Well, Robert, do these New World Order folks, do they have a soul? It's kind of a crime of collusion where it's all about maintaining money and maintaining power. I actually consider them the old world order because they're clearly made up with the aristocracy and the old money, old European money. You know, it really damages a kind of view of politics. It devalues politics completely. But the problem you've got coming up next month in the US is you can vote for the rich, white, upper middle class, geriatric right-wing politician or the rich, white, upper middle class, geriatric right-wing politician. At no point should the word democracy be used in that. Both your candidates are identical. They're just on a different grade of each other. Equally frightening to the rest of the world, I have to say. Well, I think that has been happening since the beginning of time, hasn't it?
Oh, absolutely. There was an idea around at the creation of America, modern America, that if you're going to create a country, you create the ruling party and you create the opposition. And then you never lose power because people believe that they've got democracy when they actually haven't got a choice. They choose either your politician or your other politician. And there is an interesting book, and this is where Freemasonry starts to get problematic. In the 1920s, a book came out, a Masonic publication called The Men's House. You can still find it today. And it has a passage in it which says one of the presidential candidates, we believe the public went against them when it was discovered that they were a Freemason. However, the other presidential candidate was also a Freemason. And you read that and think, well, how is this a democracy? Those two people are in the same lodge, they're in the same organisation, they meet in secret, they decide, they make their choices. We don't know if they're making their choices based on what the public needs are or what's happening in those secret meetings. So yeah, if both your candidates are Freemasons, if both your candidates are basically identical, you don't have a democracy anymore.
What are the Freemasons anyway? What do they do?
What did they do?
What did they do? I mean, I've had some calls from some people who are Freemasons, and you know they put together benefits and hospitals and stuff.
I mean, a lot of the lower degree. The interesting thing about Freemasons is, of course, the people that join it. I mean, generally join the first 3 degrees. There are 33 degrees, and to some extent, you learn in secret societies. You'll do a ritual, say, an initiation, and you'll be told what it means. But when you get further up, or higher up through the organisation, you'll get another layer of interpretation, and then another layer, and then another. So until you get to the top, how do you really know what you've joined? How do you really know what you're in service of? So it's quite difficult, and there is problems within Freemasonry around you're not allowed to basically drop another Freemason in it. You're not allowed to get another Freemason into trouble. And there's been cases in the UK where a court judge has sent somebody down for murder, and then that person has said that they were a Freemason, and one of the judges actually said, I wish I'd have known that before I sentenced him, as if to say that would have affected the sentencing.
Then you have people like whistleblowers, some in jail, some on the lam, like Edward Snowden, hiding in Russia.
Well, this is what's happened, is the new counterculture, the new real Illuminati, the people that are carrying on the Illuminati's tradition of subversion, of attacking these kind of corrupt politicians, has gone online. So the online communities are starting to become empowered. And this is a way forward because the internet is still outside of government control. They're obviously tracking everything everybody does.
Oh, sure, of course.
Snowden proved on countless occasions. But what this means is there is an outlet. What WikiLeaks created was an outlet for whistleblowers. And we've always had whistleblowers. You had the one in Philip Morris, the tobacco industry, where the guy quite high up said actually stuff is linked against. You know, you had Karen Silkwood in the nuclear industry, right back to the police in the 70s, police corruption. So we've had people speak out, but now the internet would allow them to do it anonymously. So you had WikiLeaks being able to release this information as wide as possible to the public and to try and protect the names of the people who released it. Now, someone like Snowden, it was so clearly identified the person who had his job because he knew so much and he had such high security that he had no choice because there was no way they wouldn't have known it was him. So he had no choice to run.
He had to go.
I mean, this is a person who stood up to what he saw as illegal, which was there were crimes being committed. You know, when your head of security goes in front of Congress and blatantly lies and says we're not tapping phones whilst cutting through the internet cable so they could monitor it constantly, the undersea cable. You know, and Snowden looking at the stuff they were hoovering up and thinking this isn't right. This is not. I've got to do something about this. The guy's a national hero. You know, and yet the press has been really weird. They've been kind of, on the one hand, vilifying him and saying he shouldn't have done this.
And there are some people that actually think, Robert, that he's a traitor.
I know. Well, he's being portrayed as a traitor. The man is an absolute patriot.
I think any time somebody comes forward and points out illegalities, especially of the scope and magnitude that Snowden pointed out, he is a hero.
Oh, absolutely.
I mean,
and one of their excuses is, well, he should have gone through the correct channels.
Maybe he tried.
But a few years previous to him doing this, somebody else did go through correct channels, and they got fired. And then someone else who supported them within the organisation found themselves in prison.
And he probably saw that.
Yeah, and you think you cannot go through direct channels because you will lose your job. They will close your bank account, and they will find some excuse to put you in prison.
Yeah.
Currently, for example, he's being charged with treason. Now, there's nothing, spying.
Did you notice that not one of our two major presidential candidates talked about Edward Snowden? As far as I'm concerned, they haven't talked about him. I haven't heard anything.
Why aren't the press asking them about it?
Yeah, that should have been a great question at one of the debates.
Yeah, why?
You know, if you're elected president, what will you do with Edward Snowden? Will you allow him back into the country, drop all the charges? What would you do? I'd love to hear their response.
I think Hillary once said that that they ought to that he ought to be killed at some point. But there is an issue because one of the charges levelled against him carries a death penalty, even though it's something he's not guilty of.
Oh my God!
Espionage, I think it is. He's had one of the many charges that they've heaped on him. One of them is the idea that he would take these secrets and sell them to a foreign country.
I don't think he did
to undermine the security of the U.S., which he never intended to do and hasn't done.
It's unfortunate that he ended up in Russia, though, I guess. It
is. But there are very few places that could stand up to the U.S. So that is the problem. As Julian Assange, you know, the co-creator of WikiLeaks.
I know. They've nipped his internet service, Robert.
Yes, I know. They're suppressing him during the... So there's obviously pressure on Ecuador from the U.S. government to suppress his internet access during the
elections. Yeah, you're right. I think right after the election, his internet will go back up again.
He's not even in your country. Not only do you supposedly have freedom of speech, but since when are you allowed to suppress the freedom of speech of people in other countries who are not criminals? He's not been. He was never charged. He's not under any criminality.
What are people saying worldwide about the world right now?
I think, like me, one of the reasons I got very interested in, because I was never that, I kind of kept an eye on politics. I think, like me, one of the reasons I really started to dig in to try and find out what was going on is because we're getting this sense of disassociation. We don't really understand why governments are acting the way they are, or why the world seems to be getting worse and not better. And we're going and committing these wars that don't seem to fix anything and just cost obscene amounts of money. You know, they just pushed countries further and further into national debt.
Do you think Tony Blair got duped by George Bush, who I think got duped?
I don't think he was duped. I think Bush must have had something over him, and I don't know if it was trade agreements or what, but there was this sense that nobody could be that stupid. He had to be acting against his own self-interest. He was being pulled into something, and there must have been some deal in the background, and whether it was part of the rights to the oil, the spoils, the share of the spoils, it was either for wealth and greed, or they had something on him politically that they could blackmail him into doing it, because no rational person would have dragged us into that war. It was an absolute folly.
Well, and everybody fell for it, and they all went along with it.
Well, yeah, I mean, it's weird. See, that's what feeds into people's idea that there is a New World Order. When the press don't stand up every day and say, there are no WMDs, we know there are no WMDs, why are you still doing this? If we find that there are no WMDs, are you going to resign? Because if a politician stands and says, I make this promise, or this exists, the response of the press should pretty much always be, and if there isn't, will you resign? And if they say yes, you hold them to it. And it's the same with politicians going into government. If they make promises, you should have a list of those promises and say, right, what are you promising?
Well, the English form of government seems to go along with if something happens, they just resign. You don't wait until another election, for example. Here, we're stuck, basically, other than impeachment proceedings, we're stuck with them for 4 years.
I know. We have cabinets that can be shuffled around and people can move in and out of roles. You seem to have people that are permanently in roles, regardless of the government. That seems really odd. Well, it really does.
Hey, Robert, tell us where we can get your books.
It'll be on Amazon. It'll be... if you go to my website, I've got links to... There's a lovely link for local bookshops in the US.
Great.
Where you can find it in your local bookshop or order it through your local bookshop. If you can support a local bookshop, please do. Go onto the site, but look up, local bookshops in your area. Order it. It's available through a distributor in the US, so it'll be widely available.
Robert, when we come back, I want to talk with you about where are we headed. What's the future hold, in your opinion, for all of us? And then we'll also take an hour of phone calls from listeners who really want to talk with you. I'm George Norrie, and we'll be back in just a moment on Coast to Coast AM. Secret societies. If you know anything about them, check in with us as well. Questions with Robert Howells when we roll right back on Coast to Coast AM. Welcome back. Robert Howells with us. So, Robert, as we look towards the future, and we know the globalists, those who want the one world government, the new world order, they're pushing and doing their things. Can we win as individuals? Can we pull this off?
I think we can. We were at a very interesting point in history because countercultures always existed, groups have always existed to fight against that kind of corrupt power. But we have the internet, we have this disruptive technology, and that's opened us up to lots of alternative information. So we're no longer just getting Fox News or, the newspapers that we used to get as our source of information. So the first thing is, the more you know, the less of this nonsense you'd put up with, and the less you'd support people if you understood what their aims were. So if you can work out what people's aims seem to be, and whether or not they're in service of people or in service of themselves, then you can start to make judgments on that. And I think, because we are sliding towards a state kind of that's worse than communist Russia, where they're watching everything you do. They're tracking your movements. They're reading everything you post. They're doing this electronically. You haven't got people sitting there.
Yep. Are they doing this in Britain too, Robert?
Yes, they are. Oh, yes. Yeah, there's a department attached to MI6 that is actually in cohorts with the US because the NSA is not actually allowed to spy on Americans. The British do it for them and then give them the information.
Is Moneypenny responsible for that?
Yeah. Yes. They kind of touch on it in the Bond films, actually, when they start doing... They did that thing about the global means to watch everything. They already have that, the Five Eyes idea. So, and it's all... Because if it was just for terrorism or criminals, fine. But they've already started using it. There are accounts of people like Laura Poitras being stopped coming through US Customs because she's on the watch list. She's a journalist. She's a documentary maker. She's not a terrorist or a criminal. So the potential for governments to abuse this information and knowledge, you could post something against Hillary Clinton on Facebook and then have the police knock on your door. You know, you run the risk of going down that George Orwell 1984 complete surveillance, where they know and watch everything. But also the internet is a tool for the opposite, which is that there are groups forming, there are societies forming. It seems like Bitcoin, which isn't mature yet, but it's an alternative currency that would get away from the power of the banks.
Right. Banks. Oh, but that's dangerous if it's all digital. My gosh.
Yes.
I like to hold my money sometimes, don't you?
Yeah, the problem is the banks is a completely rigged game. It's a completely fraudulent game. You know, if our government borrows £100, they have to pay £10 interest on that.
Yeah.
So that £100 is invented, and in order to get the £10 interest, you have to create the £10 interest as well.
Right. Well, of course, now in this country, there is no interest right now because the Federal Reserve has just kept the lid on it. I don't know how long they're going to be able to hold that like that, though.
Yes. But it's all, you know, most of the money in the world is debt. Something like 90% of the world's money is debt. It's incredible, and so the banks really have control. It's very hard for people to get organised and to fight that. But if you can find, support WikiLeaks, support Anonymous, try and be anonymous in yourself, even if you've not done anything yet. If you ever do something in the future, they will just trawl through your history looking for something to pull you up on.
Yeah. Have you seen any effect from Brexit yet?
Yeah, markets have dropped like a brick.
Oh, they have? Wow.
I was quite shocked by Brexit. I thought it was a really... it was linked to that kind of unhealthy nationalism, and there was an underlying kind of racism because of it's causing unemployment issues over here that people are allowed to travel from other European countries to work here. I don't have a problem with that, and I think it's a tiny thing, but I do think the European Union got too political. If they'd just stayed as a kind of trading bloc and allowed countries to set up their own laws, but cut all the kind of inter-country taxes and stuff like that on trade, it would have worked. But it has become a really unwieldy and expensive political thing. However, I'd have rather have stayed in Europe. I think it would have been better. The UK will be all right because the currencies in London and the financial sector is kind of the centre of business in Europe, so that will keep it afloat. But the only way we'd really survive is if we went back to manufacturing, and that's not likely to happen.
All right,
so I think we are going to struggle. I was against it. Most of the politicians were against it, and it happened because the people had enough. But then the news, all our news is just full up of immigration. You know, not real issues. They're not talking about the money being taken out of hospitals or how the healthcare is being moved into the private sector. They're just talking about immigration all the time, which is a trivial thing compared to the rest of politics.
Yeah, sure is.
Yeah.
Okay, let's take some calls here for you, Robert. Okay. They're lining up for the rest of this hour, which will go by quickly. We will go to Carol in North Carolina, east of the Rockies, to get things started. Carol, go ahead.
Thanks, George.
Sure.
I have three hypotheses I'd like to run by Robert related to current events going on in this globe.
All right. Let's do them one at a time, okay?
Okay.
Okay, Carol.
First of all, you were talking about why they're having all these wars, getting rid of those dictators over the Middle East, like in Afghanistan and Syria and all so forth. Well, if you're part of the global comptrollers and you want to control the world and its resources, you can't leave dictators in individual countries because then you've got one man with a lot of power because he controls all the people in his country. That's number one. And
Yes,
so
I
you
agree with
do
that.
what is currently being done in this country during the election. You know, you have a person like Trump appearing to run, but really selected by the global people and Hillary people to suck up the air of the media, to distract from the media needing to focus on Hillary's negative points, and to
I
put
agree
their
with that. Yes.
and to put
Yeah.
their person in place, assuming
Yeah.
she is the world comptroller's, you know, person. And then the
I
third
agree.
thing,
In Hillary, you've got potentially a terrible leader who's being made to look like the better of two evils. When in any other election, nobody would ever have voted for Hillary. It's just the other person is so extreme and so ridiculous that you know, honestly, as a nation, if you could, just all vote green, vote something else. Just don't vote for either of them. They're both pretty appalling as far as I can see. Sorry, continue.
she does seem to add credibility to the existence of the reptilian governing us. Anyway, and then number 3, you know, you're saying that the internet, you know, is a good thing now, and that's given us a voice and so forth. But didn't I thought Obama gave over that control to Russia and China? So that's
the ICANN, the Internet Registration Service. It doesn't give them any control. It was never. The thing was, it was never America's to begin with. It's just America wouldn't share it. So it was already a worldwide. It belonged to a conglomerate, the control of the internet. So it should never have been in America's hands. And that in itself is quite a dangerous thing as well. I'm not keen on China and Russia having any control.
Robert, where somewhere on this planet the internet's major brain is? You know, where is it? What building is it in?
The fact is, it's a distributed network. So you have the cloud and you have servers in every country. So, and what they found out in the Arab Spring was countries, you know, the leader of Egypt or that would shut down what they thought was the internet in their country by making all the local ISPs switch off. And then Anonymous would come along and give people internet access by routing them out of the country. So you can actually prevent, there are ways around that kind of censorship, which is one of the reasons the internet has got some future, is because nobody singularly controls it.
You can't blow up one place somewhere in some country and shut it all down.
No, you can reroute to a server in Amsterdam or in Belarus or in Australia. You know, you can bounce it off a satellite if you need to. You can bounce it off other people's mobiles. There was a thing they tried in Africa where you could use a mobile as a server to connect the nearest mobile. So you could be in the middle of the desert, and if there were 10 mobiles between you and an internet provider, you could bounce through them if they were switched on and share the carrier and get access to the internet. So that's one of the things about the robustness of the internet as a medium that we've never had before, is it's not state-controlled. The only one that is I think North Korea built its own internet that isn't plugged into any other internet, its own phone network, basically. So it doesn't share it with the outside world. And I think it's got 400 websites and very few people are allowed to access it. So that is a completely state-owned internet. But even then, anyone who gets hold of a mobile phone will be able to pick up the internet from South Korea.
All right, let's go back to the phone. Steve is in Pennsylvania now. Steve, go ahead. You're on with Robert Howells.
George, good morning.
Hey, Steve.
Robert. I hope you enjoyed your trip to your conference there.
Yeah, it all went well.
Great. And my question for Robert.
Yes.
I'd like to get your view on the Bilderberg Society and Clinton's involvement. I understand that she sent a representative, and apparently I presume that you would...
I'm sure she did. The Bilderbergs, what do you think of that, Robert?
Yeah, they're one of the groups.
They're part of it. They're part of it, aren't they?
They appeared after World War II. They've got specific roles. So each of those groups had a specific role. They're one of the ones basically moving towards globalization. And, yeah, there is this problem mechanism of what are they actually deciding behind closed doors. Because there's nothing to stop these world leaders and politicians getting together and saying, we're going to create a civil war in Indonesia, destabilise the country, destabilise the government, and turn what was a self-sustainable country with its own bank and everything into another World Bank outlet, and create massive debt, which is what actually happened there. Bankrupted a country and left them in debt, and they did this by moving. The governments of the world seemed to collude to move a dictator into power there, that they funded into power, that caused great massacres. And then you could do that in a country, and then you could take it over by putting it into huge debt, and then it's beholden to you, and then you can force it to take out trade rules.
Squeeze
it. It's quite frightening that they're involved. Any politician should be embarrassed to be involved with the Bilderberg Group, or Bohemian Grove. It should be a stain on their career because people shouldn't trust them.
Trilateral Commission, same thing?
Yes, absolutely, yeah. It's trying to bring the world together. But in order to do that, you're moving towards a one-world government, the idea of a one-world government.
CFR, Council on Foreign Relations?
Council on Foreign Relations, yeah, that's another one.
They're everywhere, aren't they? And the same club members are in each organization, aren't they?
Yes, there'll be crossover in membership between them. And they're functioning like secret societies, but they're secret societies with people who are some of the most powerful people in the world. So that makes them very scary.
First-time caller, Jonathan in Montana. You're up with us. Hi, John. Go ahead.
Hi, Jonathan.
Hey, folks.
Hi there.
How are you guys doing?
Good, John.
Hi.
Hey, I've been listening to you, George, for many years, and I have never felt the need to call before. I wanted to let Robert know that his views on the Afghan war, I've been preaching that to the choir since I came back. I'm an Afghanistan.
Oh, thank you
veteran.
for your service, by the way, Jonathan.
Well, and it was my privilege, and I'm very proud to have done that, but it was very clear to me, and I was there from 2011 to 2012, and I just can't understand why. I'm not sure I get the whole secret society, Illuminati stuff or whatever, but I just wanted to throw this out there that it seemed very clear to me that the Pentagon should have figured out by about 2003 that Afghanistan was a lost cause.
Yeah. When you were there, Jonathan, did you say to yourself and to some of your other soldiers, what are we doing here?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. And that was a common a common topic of conversation. And the thing is, I was there in 2011. We took out bin Laden then, and that was kind of a rough time for us. But what I know is the year that I was there, we were spending $11 billion a month, and that's with a B.
Oh,
$1 billion
a month?
And and it certainly wasn't worth that, but what's more important is it certainly wasn't worth the 30 or 40 servicemen and women that we were losing every month that I was there. So it was very clear to me. I mean, I'm a low man on the totem pole, but it's supposed to be a lot of people more intelligent than me at the Pentagon trying to figure this stuff out, and they didn't. But so I just want to throw that out because I've been preaching this, from my soapbox forever since I got back, and you nailed it. Robert, you nailed it right on the head. That it didn't make sense to me. But not to say that I'm not proud of my service, because I am.
Oh, of course.
But, thank you.
But yeah, so you just nailed that. So I just wanted to throw that out there.
All right, thank you.
Thank you very much. I think at some point people have to realize that if the military, our servicemen and women are being sacrificed for the aims of that we don't understand or that aren't really for the protection of our country, then you need to teach your children not to join the army. You need to say to them, don't go to war unless our country is being invaded. Because honestly, You can't fight terrorism with millions of pounds worth of bombs, billions of pounds worth of weapons. That's not how terrorism works. You know, it doesn't have a headquarters that you can just flatten and you've won. It's an ideology. You can't bomb an ideology.
Well,
we're sacrificing all these our young people, our strongest, our youth, to wars that are for no value other than to make people rich that are in the arms industry and the oil industry.
Robert, would you agree with this, that even if there was no real terrorism, that the New World Order would create it in order to keep things going?
Well, yeah, there's a lot of arguments to say that that's actually what they have done.
Yep.
Because if you do start to look at the origins of these people, and even Bin Laden, you look at how friendly the American government was with the Bin Laden family, and remained.
Well, and with him specifically, my gosh,
yeah.
we armed them.
18 of those terrorists from 9/11 were Saudi Arabian, and yet Hillary Clinton was quite happy to take, 10 million donation from the Saudis? So,
I got to tell you something, Robert. You know your American politics. My gosh, you study it.
Not really, honestly, I haven't. I'm not. I wish I had more.
You're pretty good.
Because in fact, I think the rest of the world knows your politics because it has an impact.
It sure does. We're going to come back in just a moment, Robert. We're going to take final phone calls with you. Fast movie night. Robert Howells, our special guest, as we talk about secret societies. One of his books called The Illuminati. We'll be back. Okay, welcome back to our final segment here on Coast to Coast with Robert Howells. By the way, tomorrow night we'll have some spooky things and then open lines on a Friday night. You know what that is all about. Robert, as we get into this, I want to thank you for spending the night for us here in the United States. And what is your way, about 9:30, 10 o'clock down there?
Yeah, it's 9:30, yes.
So
Thank you very much.
What does the future hold for all of us on this planet? In your opinion, if we keep down the path we're going?
I think the 1% of population that own over 60% of the money in the world, it's so clear that how unfair that is, that if they do not start to share the wealth, if they do not start to reinvest in things, in the poorest people and bring them up to some standard of living, then I think at some point it will resolve down to violence. I think we run the risk of anarchy and chaos. It concerns me because I don't think it needs to be that way. But as long as people like Edward Snowden are willing to stand up and say this is wrong, because government is made up of thousands of people, and only a few of them hold the wealth and hold the power. And it's the people around them that have the power to either influence them or to stand up and speak out and say, this person's a criminal, this organisation is behaving against the interests of the public. And more of that needs to be leaked. More support WikiLeaks, support Anonymous. And if enough of that stuff comes out, we have a transparent government, then things will have to be fairer, things will be more obvious. They won't be able to make these deals or do these actions or invade countries without our understanding of what's really going on. So I think we need more whistleblowers, and I think we need more transparency. And I think the mainstream news needs to be held to account. People should be saying, I'm not going to watch mainstream TV. They're already doing it. They're listening to people like you. They're listening to... they're looking on the internet and looking for real footage of people. We had the Baghdad blogger. We have people who are on the ground in these wars who are writing what's really like. So, people are going to have to start to move away from the mainstream TV and let go of it because it's not serving their needs.
They are not getting what we're talking about tonight. You don't get that on the mainstream media. They don't hear about that.
I know, and they're shocked that people are, abandoning channels and going online instead. But people want the truth. That's all. We all deserve some honesty from our governments.
That's what they want. They want the truth. Ed in Tulsa, Oklahoma. Go ahead, Ed. You're up with us.
Yes, Mr. Howells. There are 3 questions I want to ask you real quick.
One at a time. Let's do one at a time. Okay.
Are you familiar with a lady named Karen Hudes? Hudes. She worked with the federal banking system at the top end of the pyramid with the Jesuits and the Illuminati and the Masons. She claims they are not even human. They're from another world. They're centroids with elongated skulls. That's the first question.
Right?
No, I wasn't aware of her. There is a lot of theories around the elongated skulls that are found in Nazca, and there's this idea of interbreeding with aliens, and I don't hold up much on that, I have to say. I think, well, for one, this could go in all sorts of directions.
Oh, yes.
No, I'm not aware of her. I don't go for the aliens as part of humanity or the lizards and all that. A lot of that came from David Icke. He read a number of books.
One of your English types.
Yes.
Well, she's a whistleblower. I know I found her on YouTube, and supposedly she is a whistleblower.
Yes.
We got to check into her.
I'd have to look her up, but I do know a lot of the stuff about this idea of the lizards and the royal families and that. Mm-hmm. I know where that comes from, and I don't think it's correct. That's good research.
Well, the next thing that I wanted to
find out is... Look at the source
is
material and see if you can find evidence for yourself. You know, you don't have to believe me or her. You need to find your own way to some extent. Okay, next question.
I don't rely on mainstream news for anything, and that was going to be my next question. Why is it that mainstream news, political talk radio shows, if you just mention the word Bilderberger or Illuminati, they start foaming at the mouth? Why is that?
Why do we think that? I think there's a lot of it, it's very easy to discard conspiracy theory. You know, people look at the truthers from 9/11 and they say, it's just nonsense. And they can discard the whole lot out of hand, because you will get a few extremists who say, it didn't happen, there wasn't and really kind of absurd ideas. But if you actually dig into it, you start to find that there's something not right in there. If you look up Building 7 on the World Trade Center, that something happened there, and that looks like a proper demolition. That does not look like
that was a controlled demolition. It's too weird.
Yeah, it does not look like a concrete and steel building that only takes one day to burn down. If all your buildings burn down that fast, you should demolish everything, because there's no building on Earth made of steel and concrete that can burn.
Like that?
Sorry?
Like that?
No, not in that amount of time. You can't demolish a 47-story building in one day.
Well, and it didn't get hit by anything.
Well, it got hit by debris from the main tower,
just debris, but the planes didn't hit it.
But when you look, there was footage of the collapse, and when you see the collapse, and you look at any footage of a controlled demolition of a large building, they're identical.
Oh, my God, yeah. It's like a Vegas taking down a casino implosion.
Yes, absolutely. We've seen it so many times before. You look at it and you think, okay, that looks like a controlled demolition. Yeah. And then you start to look into it, and you think, all right, there is all this conspiratorial kind of lunacy around this that goes off in all directions, but underneath this, I don't think we know the truth of what really happened.
No. And you had a third question, Ed?
Yes.
Are they deliberately, the Illuminati, the global elites, are they deliberately trying to collapse the world's financial system so they can implement the one world monetary system, which I believe, now I'm a Christian man, and I look at it as the beast system. Are they deliberately trying to collapse the world economy so they can implement the digital monetary system?
Well, most of the bank's money is made from debt or from war. So if you've got an organization that controls your currency that gets rich from debt or war, what are the two things it's going to drive people into? And if you create wars, you create huge debt, because you pay for the weapons to destroy a place, and then you have to pay for the rebuilding of the place. It's completely unnecessary, but it makes banks an incredible amount of money. The only way to stop that is to bring in legislation that you cannot profiteer, that it is illegal to profiteer from wars, that you're not allowed to lend money for wars. Wars would stop if the banks didn't support them. There would have been no World War II if the banks didn't fund Hitler, because Germany was bankrupt. Mm-hmm. Yet he mobilized 1 million people to war because he had funding. He had banks funding him.
How much money do they need, Robert? How much money do they need?
I know. Well, it's part of that kind of money and power, if you've got it, to hang on to it and to do everything you can to protect it in the future. but it's become so extreme now. The difference in wealth is so extreme. It's like feudal times when you had a few lords who were absolutely rolling in it and everyone else was a poor slave peasant. And they're basically turning us back into that kind of culture.
Let's go to Tom in Phoenix, Arizona, west of the Rockies. Tom, go ahead, sir.
Hi, Tom.
For another great Coast to Coast. Are you there?
Yeah.
It's been great, listening to current events, but those secret societies that claim if you just, keep writing them a yearly dues check, they will, for example, I did some research into like Rosicrucian and that type of thing. Robert, I heard you say that you choose not to be a part of any of them, but is there anything in your view that what you've learned from your study that they have something worthwhile that they're keeping hidden?
I think most of what secret societies know is out there, if you can find it, if you can read up on it. Certainly in my book I publish all the rituals of the Illuminati, so what they actually trained, how they trained people and taught people, and their kind of philosophy. It's all pretty much out there, and I think a lot of the heretical stuff in recent years has come out, the kind of questioning religion and questioning the historical accuracy. It's not to say that religions don't have a value, but if they make claims that are historical, that aren't true, there's evidence to the contrary, or to widen out religions, to make them more spiritual and less based on dogma or belief. I think it's all pretty much in the public domain now. And certainly Amorc, the Rosicrucian groups, they're modern, they're not the original Rosicrucians. They do have libraries with the original publications, some very early and interesting publications, but they're kind of teaching self-development courses, which is, it's up to people if you want to go down that route, but they're not a continuation of the real Rosicrucian order, I don't think.
Robert, what do you think of the Vatican Bank?
Wow. It's one of the few banks in the world that doesn't have any outside inspection at all, which means it could be completely corrupt, full of mafia money, full of illegal money, and nobody knows. And it's probably, the Vatican is probably bankrupt, but it's just running on gas, basically, running on fumes, because the Vatican Bank, it's known to be in it. There's been leaks from it that it's an in-bed of fraud.
Really? They own so much property. Wow, so much.
Yes, largest landowner in the world. Don't give money to churches. God doesn't need any money. People shouldn't give money to religion. They're not. There's nothing Christ-like about being rich. It's the complete opposite. Christ had humility and was poor and gave all his money to people poorer than himself. So if you come across anyone who's religious who claims, you need to give them money, then just walk away, because that's not religion.
Tommy in North Carolina, east of the Rockies. Tommy, go ahead.
Hi, Tom.
Hey, how's it going, guys?
Good, Tom. Thank you.
Tried to get through the other night, but for some reason it was time to go. But anyways, wanted to ask you guys if you had seen Hillary's America and what your thoughts on that was. I saw it. I think that it's, to me, it seems true. I mean, I've always believed, there was corruptness in government and other things in other areas for a long time. And I'll take my answer off the air.
Have you had a chance to see any films, documentaries, Robert?
I've not been watching documentaries, but of the research I've done, it's something I came across.
They're very good. They're well done.
Yeah, I should watch them, but I kind of had enough background research. I came across somebody many years ago who was linked to the CIA when Bill Clinton was in power, and they said to me, it's not Bill you've got to worry about, it's his wife, she's terrifying. And that was before she was even in power.
That is amazing.
So I kind of stayed with that, and I kept an eye on her. But yeah, I think the level of corruption, I think there is a lot of evidence that these are corrupt people. But what's your choice? Where are you going to go?
Well, that's the issue. Can you write in none of the above, go libertarian, go Green Party, who knows? But yeah. I think there's a distinct possibility that we may not have the electoral college votes, enough of them, for one of those two being the president. It's going to have to go. It's going to go to Congress, and they're going to pick.
Yeah, I mean, just all go green. It can't do any harm. It can only improve sustainability of the planet if you go green. It'll cut down on the number of wars and the amount of money you spend on the military.
See, I just want to know what these New World Order folks are doing right now. I mean, I bet they're scrambling.
Well, yeah, they're fighting people on the internet. They're creating laws to arrest and lock away people like Edward Snowden and the anonymous people, which is really terrible.
Frustrating. Joe, truck driving in South Dakota. Hey, Joe, thank you. Go ahead.
Hi, Joe.
Thank you. Hey, you mentioned the Illuminati originally was trying to get people in government that actually serve the people. Is there a group that still does that today, or?
That's the problem. People say the Illuminati in that form's still going, and I don't see any evidence for it. It's very hard to see how anyone's got any good influence. You know, you get a few politicians that appear quite good, or certainly better than those around them, and you can kind of see them, but they're on their own. You know, there's no, other than out of the kind of conspiracy theory groups. I mean, I like groups like Anonymous because they look at things that they see as wrong, and they try and help, and they try and act on it. So if they see a government suppressing its people, they'll try and help those and support those people. And they supported a lot of the Arab Spring uprisings and things like that. So yeah, in terms, that's why in my book I see the Anonymous and WikiLeaks as a continuation of that counterculture. But you have to find it online in communities and groups like that. There is a move away from some things. Digital currencies trying to take power away from the banks. That's quite interesting. But there's no big organisation. I'm not seeing. Maybe we should create one.
Any predictions on what's going to happen in the election?
I think Hillary will get in.
Okay. I've had many experts say that too.
But see, I think the thing with Trump was I think Congress would have blocked everything he tried to do, so he would have ended up being harmless. And most of the damage he would have done would have stayed within the U.S., whereas Hillary's got far more potential to do a lot of damage worldwide.
Yeah, interesting. And I don't think Putin likes her at all, and God knows what will happen there. Russia's starting to flex its muscles, even, making... and what was this about North Korea threatening England? Did you hear about that?
We're not really worried about North Korea.
Oh, that guy's a whack job, though, Robert, and he's got nukes.
No, I don't really fear North Korea.
You're not concerned about that guy. I think he's a dangerous idiot.
There must be something incredible when, in fact, that pretty much a third world country. I don't see them having the resources or the technology to do anything to anybody. I mean, they do this showing off thing, but if they ever became a real threat, surely they wouldn't stand up in a fight at all.
Robert, do you take emails through your website?
Yes, I can do.
You get messages and stuff?
If you can find me on Facebook, on R.D. Howells on Facebook. You can certainly contact me through Facebook. Okay,
that's good. And your books are out there all over the place. And keep in touch with us. I'd like you to be our source for the Illuminati whenever those kinds of stories are breaking. Would you do that for us?
Yeah, why not? Yeah.
Okay, all right, good. It was good to have you on the program. Enjoy the rest of the weekend, Robert.
And you. Thank you for having me on, and thank you to your listeners, and especially those that called in. And the ex-serviceman, John, really thank you for calling in.
Best listeners in talk radio in the world, right here on Coast to Coast AM. For Dan Galante, Tom Danheiser, Lisa Lyon, Lex Lonehood, Sean Ladessor, Stephanie Smith, Chris Borelson, George Knapp, I'm George Norrie, somewhere out there on Coast to Coast AM. We'll see you on our next edition. Until then, be safe, everyone.